A broken marriage, a stolen fortune, and a Korean mafia boss who stepped out of the shadows to claim her as his own. Not because he wanted her body, but because something in her eyes reminded him of everything power could never buy. What happens when the most feared man in Chicago decides that one woman, pregnant, alone, and hunted, is worth more than an empire? Stay with me until the very last second of this story. If this reaches your heart, hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The pen scratched across the signature line like it was cutting something open. Imani Brooks pressed down harder than she needed to, harder than the notary required, harder than made any kind of practical sense. But her hand needed something to push against. Her hand needed to feel like it was doing something other than shaking. The notary, a bored woman in her late 50s with reading glasses perched at the absolute tip of her nose, slid the second page across without looking up. Imani signed that one too, then the third, then the fourth. Each signature felt like pressing a thumb into a bruise just to confirm it was still there. Marcus Darnell Vaughn. His name was printed in clean block letters at the top of every page, right next to hers. She had loved that name once, had practiced writing it next to her own the summer before their wedding, sitting on her mother's porch in a heat that felt like it meant something. 4 years ago. She had been 26 and certain about everything. She was 30 now and certain about nothing except the dull nausea sitting low in her stomach, which had nothing to do with the fluorescent courthouse lighting. 7 weeks. She hadn't told anyone, not her sister Janelle, not her best friend Priya, not the OBGYN at the free clinic on Roosevelt who had confirmed it with a look that carefully avoided judgment. Nobody knew. She had driven to that appointment alone, sat in the parking lot for 11 minutes afterward with both hands flat on the steering wheel, then driven back to her apartment and made herself a cup of tea she didn't finish. Nobody knew. And she intended to keep it that way until she figured out what in the world she was going to do. That's everything. The notary stamped the final page with the mechanical indifference of someone who had witnessed the legal destruction of approximately 300 marriages and felt nothing particular about any of them. Copies will be mailed within 10 to 14 business days. Thank you, Imani said, because she had been raised to say thank you, even when gratitude was the furthest thing from what she felt. She gathered the papers into a folder, the folder Marcus's lawyer had sent over, because Marcus himself hadn't shown up today. Of course he hadn't. Marcus Vaughn did not attend the consequences of things he had done. He sent lawyers. He sent texts from blocked numbers. He sent apologies that arrived 3 days late and explained nothing, and asked for forgiveness, as though forgiveness were a vending machine that accepted excuses as currency. She didn't know where he was. She hadn't known for 6 weeks. The courthouse hallway was long and echoey and smelled like industrial cleaner and old carpet. Imani walked with the folder tucked under her arm and her coat pulled close, even though the building was overheated in the way all government buildings were overheated in October, aggressively, as though warmth were something to punish people with. She was watching the floor. She always watched the floor when she was thinking hard, a habit her mother had scolded her for since childhood. You walk like you expect the ground to disappear on you, her mother used to say. Maybe that's because it does, Imani had always thought, but never said. She didn't see him until she was already walking into him. The collision was solid and abrupt. The folder hit the floor, and the papers fanned out across the tile in a wide, humiliating arc. Imani's first instinct was to drop immediately to her knees and gather them, which she did, and it wasn't until she was crouched on the courthouse floor collecting the detritus of her failed marriage that she registered the man she had walked into. He crouched at the same moment she did. He was Korean, somewhere in his late 30s, with the kind of stillness that didn't come from calm. It came from practice. The kind of stillness that had been built over years until it looked natural. He wore a dark coat, no tie, a watch that caught the light in a way that suggested it cost more than Imani made in a year. His hands were collecting her papers with careful, deliberate movements, and when he glanced at the top page, the one with Marcus's name printed in clear block letters across the top, something shifted behind his eyes. It was not a large shift. It was the kind of thing most people would have missed entirely. Imani was not most people. 4 years of marriage to a man who lied the way other people breathed had made her fluent in the microlanguage of expressions people weren't aware they were making. He had recognized Marcus's name. He handed her the papers without commenting on them. His eyes, when they met hers, were dark and absolutely unreadable, and he held her gaze for exactly 2 seconds longer than a stranger should. "Are you hurt?" he asked. His English was precise and faintly accented. His voice was lower than she'd expected, and quieter. "I'm fine," she said, which was not true in any meaningful sense but was the automatic answer her mouth produced. She stood. He stood at the same time. They were close enough that she could see the precise line of his jaw, the faint scar that ran along the left side of his chin. "You should be more careful," he said. "In buildings like this, it is easy not to see what is directly in front of you." She wasn't entirely sure he was talking about the hallway. She started to say something dismissive and polite, the kind of thing you said to strangers in corridors when the interaction had gone on slightly too long. But before she could, he reached into the interior pocket of his coat and produced a small card. Plain, white, a phone number and nothing else. "If you find yourself in a situation you cannot manage alone," he said, "call that number." Amani looked at the card. She looked at him. She had lived in Chicago long enough and worked in enough late-night diners to have developed a finely calibrated sense of when someone was dangerous. Every nerve she had was sending the same signal. He was dangerous, but he was also looking at her the way people looked at you when they were telling you the truth, which in her experience was rarer than it should have been. "I don't even know your name," she said. The faintest thing moved across his face, not quite a smile, something more controlled than that. "Kangji Tai," he said. Then he walked away. No explanation, no follow-up. His footsteps made almost no sound for a man of his size, and within seconds he had turned a corner and disappeared as though he had never been there at all. Amani stood in the courthouse hallway, holding a plain white card with a phone number on it, her divorce papers tucked under her arm, the low nausea still turning in her belly, and something she couldn't name pressing quietly against the inside of her chest. She put the card in her coat pocket. She walked to the parking structure, drove her 2017 Civic with the cracked rear bumper to the Elgin Street Cafe, where she had worked for 3 years, and changed into her uniform in the back bathroom because her shift started at 11 and she was already 4 minutes late, and Darnell the manager had started docking pay for lateness since August. She didn't think about Kangji Tai again until approximately 2 hours later when the front door of the cafe exploded inward. There were 3 of them. Big men, pale, in dark clothing that had the deliberate plainness of people who didn't want to be described. The first one through the door swept his gaze around the room with the systematic efficiency of someone running a checklist. He found Amani behind the counter, and he stopped moving. "Amani Brooks," he said. It was not a question. She had a coffee pot in her hand. The cafe had 6 customers. 2 elderly men at the window table. A young mother with a toddler in a high chair, a businessman on his laptop, a woman reading a paperback. Every one of them looked up. "Get out," the man said to the room. Nobody argued. They left with the particular speed of people who had grown up in Chicago and understood certain tones of voice. The young mother grabbed her toddler so fast the child made a startled sound that cut off as the door swung shut behind them. Darnell appeared from the kitchen doorway, saw what was happening, and performed a rapid internal calculation that resulted in him disappearing back through the same door. Amani did not blame him. She and Darnell had never been close. She set the coffee pot down on the counter. Her hands were steady. She didn't understand why her hands were steady. Some part of her brain had separated from the situation and was watching it with the detached curiosity of someone watching it happen to someone else. "I don't know what this is about," she said. "Your husband took money that belongs to people I work for." The man's accent was Eastern European, thick as concrete. "A lot of money. Your husband cannot be located. You, however. You were very easy to locate." "He's my ex-husband. We signed the papers this morning." The man smiled without warmth. "That is not finalized yet. Legally, you are still his wife. His debts are community property." "That is not how Illinois divorce law. I am not interested in Illinois divorce law." He reached across the counter and wrapped one hand around her wrist, and the grip was not gentle. "You are going to come with us while we reach out to your husband to explain the situation." The thing about real fear, Amani had learned once when a man had followed her to her car in a parking garage, was that it didn't feel like fear. It felt like clarity. It felt like the entire world sharpening to its actual edges, all the soft and comfortable parts burning away, until what remained was just the pure, unadorned truth of the moment. The truth of this moment was she was going to be dragged out of this cafe, and no one was going to stop it. She didn't fight. Fighting would have been pointless, and fighting would have gotten her hurt in her brain, with its new and private piece of information about the 7 weeks. Understood that getting hurt was not an option even if everything else was. They put her in an SUV, black, no plates she could see. The windows were tinted and she couldn't tell what direction they were driving. One man sat beside her, not touching her, which was almost worse than if he had been. His proximity was a threat that didn't need to be stated. She thought about the white card in her coat pocket. Her coat was still on. They hadn't taken her coat, her bag, her phone, either because they were sloppy or because they didn't care, or because they wanted her to feel like she had options so that fear didn't make her unpredictable. She looked at the man beside her. He was staring forward. She reached very slowly into her coat pocket. The card was there. Her phone was in her bag on the floor. She shifted slightly, casually, the way someone shifts when they're uncomfortable, and reached into the bag. The man beside her glanced at her once and then looked forward again. She typed the number from the card into her phone. Her fingers moved on muscle memory, and she didn't look down. She typed one sentence. She pressed send. She put the phone back in the bag. Then she sat with her hands folded in her lap and her breathing even and controlled, and she looked out the dark window at a city she had lived in her entire life and watched it move past like something that was happening to someone else. And she waited. The warehouse was on the south side, near water. She could smell the lake even through the walls. That particular Chicago smell of cold and industry and depth. The building was abandoned in the loud structural way that meant it had been abandoned for years, not weeks. Broken skylights, concrete floor dark with old stains, rusted equipment pushed to the walls like furniture in a house that had been cleared out in grief and never reorganized. They sat her in a chair. There were more men inside the warehouse, 6, maybe 7. She had stopped counting at 5 because the exercise of counting felt too much like accepting that the number mattered, and she didn't want to accept that yet. A different man stood in front of her, older, with the patient quality of someone who had done this many times and found the efficiency of patience preferable to the mess of urgency. He had a phone, and he showed her a number on the screen. "You will call your husband," he said. "You will tell him that he has 24 hours to return what was taken, plus the interest that has accrued, or the situation becomes permanent." "I told your people," Imani said. "I don't know where Marcus is. He left 6 weeks ago. I haven't heard from him." The older man looked at her for a moment with the tired eyes of someone evaluating whether she was telling the truth or telling a good lie. And she could see him deciding that it didn't particularly matter either way, because she had value as leverage regardless. "Then we will wait," he said simply. He walked away. 2 men remained near her. She could feel the cold of the concrete floor through the soles of her shoes. The skylights let in the flat gray light of an October afternoon in Chicago, which was not warm and was not bright, and was not anything except the light that existed. She breathed, in and out. She thought about the text she'd sent. She thought about whether a stranger with a plain white card who had recognized her ex-husband's name in a courthouse hallway could be any kind of answer to this situation, and the honest answer was that she didn't know, and that not knowing was all she had. 40 minutes passed. Then, from outside, from everywhere outside, from every direction simultaneously, she heard engines. Not one engine, not 2. Many. The sound built the way bad weather built, gradually, and then all at once, until it was filling the warehouse the way sound fills a tunnel. The men near her reacted. The older man reappeared from wherever he'd gone and said something sharp in Russian, and the men went to the walls, went to their weapons, went to the narrow windows and looked out. Imani didn't know what they saw. She heard one of them say something that sounded like a number. Then she heard another voice, lower, coming from outside the building, amplified, carrying through the walls. "Send her out," the voice said. Quiet, controlled, accented in a way that was not Russian. "You have 60 seconds to make a decision you cannot reverse." The older man stood in the middle of the warehouse floor, and his stillness was no longer the stillness of patience. It was the stillness of a man performing a rapid calculation and not liking any of the variables. He looked at Imani. She looked back at him. "You know this person," he said. It was not entirely a question. Imani said nothing. The 60 seconds, or whatever the man outside considered 60 seconds to be, ended. The warehouse doors opened, not from the inside. The light that came through was white and sharp and came from multiple sources. And the men who came through it moved with the kind of coordinated precision that turned a room into a geometry problem. Every angle covered, every exit sealed, every calculation already made before anyone had taken a step. There were more of them than there were of the Russian men, and they were better at this than the Russian men were. And within a very short period of time, the older man was standing with his hands visible, and a man in a dark coat was standing between him and Imani, and the warehouse was quiet. Kang Jitai walked in last. He looked exactly the same as he had in the courthouse hallway 3 hours ago. Same coat, same stillness. He looked around the warehouse the way he had looked around the courthouse hallway, with the complete absence of surprise that came from already knowing everything he was walking into. He stopped in front of the older man. He said something in Russian, something short and flat, and the older man's expression shifted in a way that told Imani that whatever had been said was not a reassurance. Then Jitai turned to look at her. She was still sitting in the chair. She hadn't moved. Her hands were still folded in her lap because moving her hands had seemed like an admission of something. He crossed the warehouse floor to her. He crouched down in front of her, the same motion he'd made in the courthouse hallway, dropping to the same level as her, and looked at her face with the careful attention of someone assessing damage. "You're not hurt," he said. Again, not a question. "No," she said. "Good." He straightened. He looked back at the older man. Then he said something to one of his own men, something in Korean that Imani didn't understand. The man nodded and produced a phone and moved away with it. "What are you doing?" Imani asked. "Paying them," Jitai said. She stared at him. You're paying Marcus's debt." "All of it, tonight." "How much?" She stopped. She thought about the way the older man had said the word millions with the flatness of someone stating a fact, not exaggerating. She thought about Jitai's watch catching the courthouse light. She said, "Why?" He looked at her for a moment with those dark, unreadable eyes. "Because your husband did not only steal from the Russian bratva," he said. "He also stole from me. And until I locate him, you are the only leverage that matters to anyone in this room." He paused. "Which means," he said quietly, "that if I do not remove you from this situation, you will not survive long enough for Marcus Vaughn to understand what he has cost himself." The warehouse was cold and gray and smelled of the lake, and outside the doors there were black SUVs and men with weapons, and the ordinary October evening of Chicago going on around all of it, as though none of it were happening, and Imani Brooks sat in a metal chair in the middle of all of it and understood, with the absolute clarity she'd been feeling since this afternoon began, that the man crouching in front of her in the courthouse had not given her that card because he was kind. He had given it to her because Marcus had stolen from him too. She was not rescued, she was acquired. "Come," Jitai said, and turned toward the door. And Imani stood and followed him, because there was nothing else to do, and because somewhere in her coat pocket there was a white card with a phone number she had already called, and because the child she hadn't told anyone about was 7 weeks old and entirely without options, and because she had signed divorce papers this morning believing it was the hardest thing this day would ask of her. She had been wrong about that. She walked out of the warehouse into the cold Chicago evening, and the doors of the nearest black SUV opened in front of her like something that had been waiting for her all along, and the city she had lived in her entire life spread out around her, indifferent and enormous, and blazing with light she couldn't read the meaning of. And she got in. The SUV door closed with the kind of sound that expensive things made, solid, sealed, final. And the city outside the tinted windows became something Imani was watching rather than inhabiting. She sat on the left side of the rear seat. Jitai sat on the right. Between them was approximately 18 inches of leather upholstery and the particular tension of two people who had nothing established between them, except the fact that one had just paid an unspecified sum of money to prevent the other from being killed. There were two men in the front. Neither of them spoke. The driver navigated with the calm efficiency of someone who had made this drive before and didn't need to be told where he was going. Amani watched the city move past. The lit windows of apartments, a convenience store, a bus stop with a woman in a red coat who was looking at her phone and had no idea that the black SUV sliding past her contained any particular kind of situation. "Where are we going?" Amani said. Not a question the way she'd been asking questions all afternoon. A flat statement that required an answer. "Somewhere safe," Jitaya said. "That's not an address." "No," he agreed. "It is not." She turned to look at him. He was looking forward, not at her, and the city light moved across his face in strips, lit, dark, as they passed streetlights. He had the quality of a man who was accustomed to being looked at and had long since stopped registering it. "I need you to understand something," Amani said. "I am not your collateral. I am not your insurance policy. I am not a piece of something Marcus stole that you get to hold on to while you find the rest of it." Jitai turned to look at her then, directly, fully, with the unhurried attention he'd given her in the courthouse hallway. "I know what you are," he said. "Then say it." A pause. The driver made a left turn. The city changed around them, became quieter, the storefronts giving way to wider streets and darker buildings. "You are a woman whose husband put her in a situation she did not choose," Jitai said. "And you are angry about it. Both things are reasonable." "I'm not interested in being described," Amani said. "I'm interested in going home." "You cannot go home." "That is, your address is known," he said, without sharpness, without emphasis, just the flatness of information being delivered. "Your workplace is known. The Bratva lost money tonight. And even though I settled the debt, the man who authorized that debt has a reputation to manage. He will look for something he can take from this situation that costs me. The most obvious option is you." Amani stared at him. "For how long?" she said. "Until Marcus Vaughn is located." "And when will that be?" Something moved behind his eyes. Not evasion. Something more complicated than evasion. "I don't know," he said, and it had the specific texture of a true answer given by someone who was not accustomed to giving them. She turned back to the window. She pressed her thumbnail into the pad of her index finger, a habit she'd had since childhood, something to press against when everything else was moving too fast. The nail left a small white crescent. She pressed again. The cold off the window glass reached through the door and she could feel it against her shoulder. 7 weeks. She thought about that the way she had been thinking about it all day, in flashes, in the gaps between everything else, in the 2-second intervals when she wasn't managing her face or managing her voice or managing the fundamental problem of remaining functional in conditions that were not compatible with functioning. She was going somewhere she hadn't chosen, with a man she didn't know, who had paid money she couldn't quantify to extract her from a warehouse where men with guns had been deciding whether she was more useful alive or dead. And she was 7 weeks pregnant with the child of the man who had caused all of it. And she had signed divorce papers 9 hours ago in a building that smelled like industrial cleaner. And she was so tired that the tiredness had gone past the point where it felt like anything and had become something structural, like a change in the material she was made of. She said nothing else for the rest of the drive. The estate was not what she expected, though she hadn't known what she was expecting. It sat behind a gate on a private road north of the city, surrounded by trees that were dense enough to make the nearest neighboring lights invisible. The main house was large without being ostentatious. Stone and dark wood, built low and wide, with lights along the exterior path that came on as the SUV approached. They stopped at the entrance. Jitai got out first. One of the front seat men opened Amani's door before she could open it herself, which she noted without reacting to, because reacting to every small assertion of control was an expense she couldn't afford right now. Inside, the house was warmer than the night. Quiet. There was a woman in her 50s near the entry, not a servant, not staff, something with more authority than either, with the particular bearing of someone who managed a household the way generals managed operations. She spoke to Jitai in Korean. He answered briefly, nodded toward Imani, and then said something that made the woman glance at Imani with an expression that assessed and filed away in the same motion. "Mrs. Song will show you to a room," Jitai said. "There are clothes available in the wardrobe. Someone will bring food. I don't need—" "You haven't eaten," he said. "Since before the courthouse, probably. That is not negotiable." She wanted to tell him that things being not negotiable was exactly the problem here. She wanted to say it with the full weight of everything that had happened today and everything she was carrying that he didn't know about. She said nothing because Mrs. Song was already moving and because the tiredness was structural now and because her feet had already started following before she'd consciously decided to. The room was on the second floor, large and furnished with the careful neutrality of a space meant for people who were temporary. Clean lines, nothing personal but not cold. There were plants on the windowsill, and the sheets on the bed had been turned down, and the lamp on the side table was already lit. Someone had prepared this before she arrived, which meant Jitai had made a call she hadn't heard him make, which meant he'd decided she was coming here before the warehouse, before she'd sent that text, which meant the text had told him something he had already been preparing for. She sat on the edge of the bed. Mrs. Song set a towel on the dresser, said something in quiet, accented English about the bathroom down the hall, and a call button on the wall panel, and left, closing the door behind her without sound. Imani sat in the quiet. Her coat was still on. She had forgotten she was still wearing her coat. She took it off and laid it across the foot of the bed, and the plain white card fell out of the pocket and landed face down on the floor, and she looked at it for a moment and then left it there. She went to the window. The grounds were dark, but she could see the perimeter, the tree line, the stone wall, and at intervals along it, the small distinct movement of men who were not decorative. Guards. Armed. She pressed her hand flat against the cold glass and felt the night on the other side of it, and thought about the word safe, which Ji Tae had used in the car with the confidence of someone who had spent a great deal of time defining it according to his own terms, and wondered if she would ever again be in a position to define it according to hers. Food came 20 minutes later. One of the men from the SUV brought it, a tray, actual food, rice and something braised that smelled of garlic and soy, and a warmth that reached her before she'd even lifted the lid. She hadn't realized how hungry she was until she smelled it, and then her body simply overrode the rest of her, and she ate standing up at the small table by the window without tasting much of it, just putting it in because the body required things, and the body was not just hers anymore. That thought, the body is not just hers anymore, arrived with the clarity and the weight of something that had been waiting for her to stop moving long enough to fully land. She sat down after she ate. She didn't sleep. She sat in the chair by the window with her knees drawn up and her arms around them, and she watched the dark outside and listened to the house settle around her, and she thought about Marcus. Not about loving him. That was over, had been over longer than the papers made it official, had been over in small increments across 4 years of discovering that the man she had married was in the process of being replaced, piece by piece, by something else. Something with his face and his voice and his particular way of touching the back of her neck when he wanted something from her, but without whatever it was that had made her love him in the first place. She thought about him the way you thought about a fire after it had burned through something you couldn't replace, with exhaustion and with anger and with the particular grief of someone who had understood too late how the damage was happening. He had stolen $5 million, or more, from men who sent other men to warehouses with guns. He had left. He had not called. He had not warned her. He had not apparently considered for one moment that his absence and his theft might be connected in ways that would reach her, or he had considered it and not cared enough to act on the consideration. She thought that second possibility might be the one that was true, and the one that she couldn't afford to sit with tonight, so she set it down carefully, like something breakable. And she breathed in and out in the dark room of a house that belonged to a criminal who had bought her safety like an item on a list. And eventually, without deciding to, she slept. In the morning, Jitai was already awake. She found him in a room that was not quite a kitchen and not quite an office. A large space at the back of the house, with a long table and windows that looked out over a garden that was gray and bare in the October cold, with a coffee service at one end and papers spread across the other. He was on a call when she came in. He ended it without making a production of ending it, Just a brief sentence in Korean and then a click, and he gestured toward the coffee. She poured herself a cup. She stood at the window and held it. "Did you sleep?" he said. "Some." "Good." She turned around. "I need my phone." "You have it. No one took your phone." "I need to call my sister." "Your sister's name is Janelle Brooke Patterson. She lives in Oak Park. She teaches 4th grade. She is currently not in danger because her name and address are not in Marcus's financial records and have no apparent connection to his business dealings." He paused. "However, if you call her from this location, that connection becomes active. I would prefer you wait." She stared at him. "How do you know her name?" she said. "I know many things about Marcus Vaughn's life," Jitaya said. "His wife, his connections, his habits. It was necessary to know these things before—" He stopped. He picked up his coffee. He finished the sentence in a direction that didn't complete itself. "Before what?" Amani said. He looked at her steadily. "Before I decided how to proceed." "Proceed with finding Marcus." "Yes." "And I'm what?" "Part of the proceeding." "You are someone who needs to be kept alive while the proceeding happens," he said. The flatness of it was not unkind, which was somehow worse than if it had been. She set her coffee down on the windowsill. She turned back to the gray garden and breathed through her nose, 4 counts in, and thought about what she needed and what she had available and what the actual options were, and the honest assessment was, not many, not much, and limited. "What does Marcus owe you?" she said. "Specifically." A pause. She heard him set something down on the table. 600,000, he said. "To my organization directly. The Bratva's figure is larger." "Why did he steal from you?" "Because he believed he could." Another pause. "He was doing business with both organizations, running money through his import company. He was paid well for this service. But greed is a consistent human failure." "How long were you working with him?" 2 years. She turned back around. "And you didn't know what kind of man he was in 2 years?" Jitai met her eyes. Something moved in them. Not defensiveness, something more considered than that. "I knew he was ambitious," he said. "I did not anticipate that his ambition would override his self-preservation instinct. That is an unusual combination." "No, it's not," Amani said. "It's just a man who thinks the rules don't apply to him because they haven't yet. They always think that right up until they don't." A silence. Jitai looked at her with an expression she couldn't categorize, and then he said, "Yes, that is accurate." She picked her coffee back up. They stood on opposite sides of the room, and the gray October light came through the garden windows and lay flat across the table between them, and neither of them said anything for a moment. And it was the first moment since the courthouse hallway that didn't feel like it required her to be braced against something. It lasted about 4 seconds. Then one of Jitai's men, a compact young man named Hyun, who had the permanently alert quality of someone running on adrenaline in 3 hours of sleep, appeared in the doorway and said something in rapid Korean that changed the entire temperature of the room. Jitai set his cup down. "What?" Amani said. "Wait here," Jitai said, and was already moving. "What happened?" "Hyun," he said, and Hyun moved to the doorway she'd come through with the clear function of someone whose job was now to remain between her and the exits. She waited. She stood at the window and watched the gray garden and breathed and waited. She could hear voices from somewhere else in the house. Jitai's voice, lower than conversation, and at least 2 others. The house had gone from morning quiet to something with edges. 14 minutes, by her count. Then Jitai came back. His face was exactly the same as it had been. That was the thing about him she was learning. His face didn't change, but the room did, when something had shifted in him. The room felt different when he walked back in. "There is a development," he said. "Tell me." He seemed to weigh something. "Marcus has made contact," he said. "Not with me, with the Bratva. He has offered to return the money, their portion, in exchange for being removed from our arrangement." It took her a moment to understand what that meant. "He's offering them you," she said, "in exchange for himself." "He's offering them information about my operations," Jitai said, "in exchange for clearing his debt with them and receiving their protection from me. Can he do that? Does he have enough?" Jitai was quiet for 2 seconds. "Yes, He was inside long enough to know things that would be useful to them. So he'll sell you out to save himself. Yes. And that makes my situation more complicated, Jitai said. Yes. She pressed her thumbnail into her index finger. Once, hard. He doesn't know I'm here, she said. No. If he knew I was here, would he care? She said it plainly, without inflection, without asking for reassurance or softening, because she didn't need softening. She needed information. Jitai looked at her for a long moment. I don't know, he said, which was the truest answer he could have given her, and the one that landed the hardest. She walked back to the window. The garden was there, still gray, still empty. A dead tree near the far wall had 3 crows sitting in it, equidistant, like punctuation marks. I'm pregnant, she said. She said it to the window. She said it because she had been carrying it for weeks without putting it anywhere, and her body was tired of the weight of it, and because something about the flatness of the room, the flatness of what they were discussing, made pretending seem both pointless and expensive. The silence behind her was complete. She turned around. Jitai was standing exactly where he'd been standing. His face was the same, but the room had changed again. How far? He said. 7 weeks. A pause. Marcus's. Yes. He looked at her with an expression that was working through something she couldn't track from the outside. She held his gaze because looking away from it felt like a concession she wasn't willing to make. Her hands were at her sides. She was not shaking. She was very carefully not shaking. Does he know? Jitai said. No, I found out after... She stopped. After it was clear that knowing wouldn't have changed anything he did. Another pause, longer this time. She waited for the calculation to complete itself on his face, the one she'd been dreading, the one that went, she is carrying another man's child, and that changes the arithmetic of protecting her. She waited for the version of him that was logical and criminal and entirely without personal stake in her specific situation to arrive at the conclusion that she was now more complicated than she was worth. Jitai said, You should have said this last night. I know. The doctors I have access to are better than... I know, she said again. I wasn't ready to say it last night. He looked at her. She looked at him. All right, he said. That was all. 2 words, flat and clean, containing something she couldn't immediately name, and then he turned and picked up his phone from the table and said, I will arrange for someone to come today. A doctor who can be trusted to be discreet. Jitai. He paused. Why? She said. Not about the doctor. About all of it. The card, the warehouse. Tonight. The arrangement of a doctor at 8 in the morning with the matter-of-fact efficiency of someone handling a thing that needed handling. He turned back to look at her, and for the first time since the courthouse hallway, something in his expression moved that wasn't controlled. Because the child has not done anything wrong, he said, and neither have you. It was a simple sentence, and it wasn't enough to explain everything. And he knew it wasn't enough. And Amani knew it wasn't enough. And they stood on opposite sides of the long table with the gray garden light between them, and the fact of the child, and the fact of Marcus, and the fact of the Bratva's new information, and all of it pressing down from every direction at once. And Amani Brooks understood, with the bone-deep clarity that had been her companion all day, that the moment she had said the words out loud, everything had changed in ways she could not yet see the shape of, and that there was no version of what happened next that looked anything like the life she had had before she walked through that courthouse door. The doctor came at 10:30. She was a Korean woman in her mid-40s named Dr. Yoon, and she arrived with a medical bag that was larger than a house call bag and smaller than a hospital case, and she had the particular manner of someone who had spent years operating in conditions that required discretion above all other professional qualities. She shook Amani's hand, not warmly, but respectfully, the way a person shook hands with someone they were taking seriously, and she asked her questions in English that was precise and without unnecessary softness. How far along? Any bleeding? Any cramping? Any previous pregnancies? Current medications? Last time she had eaten? Last time she had slept? Amani answered all of it. She answered it sitting on the edge of the bed in the room with the plants on the windowsill, with the same flat steadiness she had been using since the courthouse yesterday. Because the steadiness was the only thing she had full control over and she intended to keep it. Dr. Yoon examined her with clinical efficiency. She had a portable ultrasound in the bag, which she set up with the practiced movements of someone doing something she had done hundreds of times, and she applied the cold gel to Amani's abdomen and moved the transducer with careful, deliberate pressure. The sound came first, small and rapid, faster than a human heartbeat, flickering like something very small and very determined in the middle of a great deal of darkness. Amani looked at the screen. She had not looked at the screen the first time, at the clinic on Roosevelt. She had looked at the ceiling. But this time, for reasons she couldn't entirely account for, she looked. It was not much. A small gray shape on a small gray screen in a room in a house she had not chosen to be in. But the sound of it, that rapid, insistent flickering, was the most real thing she had encountered in 24 hours, and it landed somewhere under her sternum with a precision that had nothing to do with the steadiness she was maintaining and everything to do with the thing she was maintaining it for. Everything appears normal, Dr. Yoon said. Development is consistent with 7 weeks. The heartbeat is strong. She turned off the machine. You need to eat regularly, sleep adequately, and avoid significant physical stress. That last one, Amani said, may be outside my current control. Dr. Yoon looked at her. Her expression acknowledged this without commenting on it. I will leave prenatal vitamins and instructions, she said. I will return in 2 weeks, or sooner if there is a need. She packed her bag and left, and the room was quiet again, and Amani sat on the bed and listened to the absence of that flickering sound and thought about how quickly something could become necessary. Jitai was waiting in the hallway when she came out. He didn't ask how it had gone. He looked at her face and read something from it and said, "Good," which covered the ground that needed covering without requiring her to cover it herself, and she found that she was grateful for that without wanting to examine the gratitude too closely. I need to understand what's happening with Marcus, she said. All of it. Not the version where you protect me from the details, the actual situation. He looked at her for a moment. Come downstairs, he said. The room he took her to was not the kitchen office from the morning. It was deeper in the house, a room without windows, with a long table and screens on one wall showing feeds she couldn't immediately parse, exterior camera views, maps with moving markers, what looked like financial documents rendered in columns that scrolled too fast to read. 2 men were already in the room, both Korean, both with the contained energy of people who had been working without stopping. Jitai said something to them. They left without looking at Amani. He sat down at the table. He didn't invite her to sit, but there was a chair pulled out across from him, and she sat in it because standing felt like a stance, and she was tired of stances. Marcus made contact with the Bratva at 2:17 this morning, Jitai said. The contact was through an intermediary in Detroit. He offered them 3 things. The location of a shipment belonging to my organization currently in transit, the identity of 2 men in my distribution network, and he paused, and the pause was not theatrical. It was the pause of someone deciding how to hand someone a piece of information that would hurt them. Financial documentation showing money he moved through his import company, documentation that includes your name as a cosigner on 2 of the business accounts. The room was very quiet. I didn't sign anything for his business, Amani said. I know. He forged my signature. Yes. She breathed in through her nose. The air in the windowless room was recycled and slightly too cold, the kind of cold that came from air conditioning set for the comfort of machines rather than people. So to the Bratva, she said carefully, I look like a participant. To anyone looking at the documents without additional context, yes. And Marcus knew that when he made the deal. Jitai said nothing, which was its own answer. She pressed her thumbnail into her finger, the small white crescent. She had been doing it so many times in the last 24 hours that the pad of her finger was tender there, a bruise in miniature. He used my name, she said. He put me in those documents knowing that if anything went wrong, you would be the accessible target, Jitai said. Yes, I believe that was intentional. She looked at the screens on the wall, the scrolling columns, the moving markers, the exterior feeds showing the gray October garden, the stone perimeter wall, the guards at intervals. "You knew this before I told you I was pregnant," she said. "I had access to the documents, yes. And you didn't tell me last night. You had already survived one crisis. I determined that two in the same night was not." "Don't do that," she said, quiet and flat and with an edge under it. "Don't make decisions about what I can handle." That is exactly what he did. That is the specific thing that made everything else possible. The silence that followed was different from the silences before. It had weight in it. Jitai sat with it without deflecting, which she noted. "You're right," he said. She hadn't expected that. The simplicity of it disarmed her in a way that nothing else in the last 24 hours had managed to. "Going forward," she said, "I need to know what is happening, all of it, in real time." "Agreed," he said. "And I need to know what the documentation means for me, legally, specifically." "The documentation creates exposure," Jitai said. "If the Bratva share it with law enforcement as leverage in an unrelated matter, or if Marcus uses it as a bargaining chip in a legal context, your name on those accounts could be interpreted as evidence of money laundering participation. The amounts are significant. The account activity is consistent with structured transactions." She closed her eyes for 3 seconds, opened them. "He built himself a way out using me as the door," she said. "Yes." "How long has this been there?" "The accounts were opened 18 months ago. The activity began 14 months ago." 14 months. She had still been trying to make the marriage work 14 months ago. She had still been coming home to him, cooking meals he didn't show up to eat, having arguments that ended in the particular silence of two people who have stopped believing in the argument but haven't yet admitted it. She had been doing all of that while he was constructing a paper version of her that existed solely to absorb consequences he was already planning to run from. The specific nature of it, the premeditation, the quiet architectural patience of it, was something she felt in her back teeth. "I want to see the documents," she said. Jitai turned to the screen on the table in front of him. He angled it toward her. She looked at her own signature, or what was meant to look like her signature. Marcus had always known her handwriting, had watched her sign things 100 times in 4 years, receipts and cards, and the lease on their apartment and the marriage certificate itself. He had learned it the way a forger learned a target, which meant he had always, on some level, been thinking about this. She studied the signature for a long time. Then she said, "What do you need to clear this?" Jitai looked at her. "To remove my name from this," she said. "What do you need?" The original account opening documents would show discrepancies in the signature pressure and pen angle that a forensic analyst could distinguish. But obtaining those documents requires accessing the records of a private bank in the Cayman Islands that does not cooperate with external requests. He paused. Or finding Marcus and compelling him to sign a declaration of sole ownership. "Compelling," she said. "Yes." She looked at the screen for another moment, then back at him. "Find him," she said. It was 3 words, and it was not a request, and Jitai heard the difference, and he nodded once. She stood up and left the room, and in the hallway outside she stood with her back against the wall and her eyes on the ceiling, and she breathed. In, out, until the thing in her chest that wanted to be panic understood that it was not going to be permitted today, and settled. The next 3 days were the strangest she had ever lived through. The estate operated on a rhythm she slowly mapped. Jitai was awake before anyone, in the office or on the grounds, and he moved through the house with the unobtrusive efficiency of a man for whom personal comfort was an operational requirement rather than a pleasure. Meals appeared at regular intervals, prepared by a cook she never saw but whose competence was evident in every detail. The guards rotated on a schedule. Information arrived in bursts. A phone call. A man appearing in a doorway with a tablet. A brief exchange in Korean that Jitai would sometimes translate for her, and sometimes not. She had pushed back on the sometimes not. He had stopped doing it. She learned the shape of his days without intending to. He slept 4 hours, maybe 5. He ate quickly and without apparent interest in food. He had a habit of standing at windows when he was thinking, not looking out exactly, more using the glass as a surface to think against. He spoke to his mother on the phone every other day, briefly, in a tone that was the closest thing to unguarded she had heard from him. He drank his coffee black and too hot, and didn't seem to notice. She was not comfortable. She was not at home. But she was learning the place she was in, because learning a place was the first thing you did when you were somewhere you had to survive, and survival had been the project since the courthouse. On the fourth morning, something changed. She felt it before she saw the evidence of it. A shift in the house's rhythm, the guards moving differently, a call that Jitai took and then stood very still after for approximately 30 seconds before he moved again. She found him in the garden. He was outside without his coat, which was unusual for a man who seemed to operate with a specific attention to preparation. The October cold was genuine, and he was standing in it without appearing to notice. Jitai! He turned. His face was the same, but the room effect, that thing where the room changed when something had shifted in him, was present in the garden, in the open air, in the gray morning. They found Marcus, he said. Her heart did something that was not quite relief and not quite dread, and existed in the space directly between them. Where? Detroit. He has been there for approximately 3 weeks. He is currently in a hotel under a false name. He paused. He is not alone. Something in the way he said the last 3 words. Who is with him? She said. Jitai looked at her with the expression of someone holding something they had weighed and decided needed to be given directly. A woman, he said. She has been with him for at least 2 months. Her name is Dana Reyes. She worked as an accountant at his import company. 2 months. Imani stood in the gray garden in the October cold and did the arithmetic without wanting to. 2 months ago, she and Marcus had still been in the same apartment, technically, though he had been absent more nights than he was present, and the explanations had stopped coming. 2 months ago, she had been lying awake in the dark, listening to the specific silence of a man who was not going to come home. She's the one who helped him move the money, Imani said. It was not a guess. Yes, the account structures show her fingerprints at the technical level. She has financial training that Marcus does not. She built it. They built it together. Imani looked at the dead tree at the far end of the garden. No crows today. And she's in Detroit with him. Yes. Does she know about me? She knows he was married. Whether she knows the specifics of your current situation, I don't know. Imani breathed in the cold air until it hurt slightly, which was clarifying. When your men find Marcus, she said. What happens? Jitai was quiet for a moment. He will return what was taken, he said. All of it, to both organizations. And the documents, my name. He will sign a declaration of sole ownership. Will he do that willingly? Jitai looked at her steadily. No, but willingness is not a requirement. She nodded once. She turned back toward the house. Imani? She stopped. There's something else, he said. She turned around slowly because his voice had a quality she hadn't heard in it before, and she already understood before he said it that whatever came next was going to be the thing that broke the particular shape of the last 4 days and replaced it with something new. The accountant, Jitai said. Dana Reyes. When my men located Marcus's hotel, they were running a cross-reference on everyone in the building. He paused. She made a call this morning from the hotel to a number registered to a Bratva lieutenant in Detroit. She's talking to them. She has been talking to them for 6 days. He looked at her with that careful, complete attention. She is the intermediary. She was the one who brokered Marcus's offer to the Bratva. The documentation with your name on it. She prepared it. She selected which accounts to include and which signatures to present. The garden was cold and very quiet. She chose my name specifically, Imani said. Flat. Stating it out loud so she could hear what it sounded like. There were other co-signed documents in the company records that used a different name. A business partner who has since died. She chose yours. Because I'm alive and findable. And because, Jitai said, if the Bratva handed your documentation to law enforcement, Marcus and Dana could cooperate with investigators against both of us, take a reduced sentence, and disappear with whatever they managed to hold back from the return payment. The shape of it assembled itself in her mind in real time, piece by piece, like a structure being built while she watched it. Marcus had not simply stolen money and run. He had built an exit. A complete architect-level exit with load-bearing walls and a roof and her name written in the foundation. He had used her name to build a room he could walk out of, and Dana Reyes had designed it. Amani stood in the garden and felt something move through her that was not anger. Anger was too simple for it, too hot, too quick. This was something that happened at a lower temperature, something that came from the part of her that had been a woman working double shifts in a diner to cover the gap when his business had a bad quarter. A woman who had believed the apologies. A woman who had signed the divorce papers with a steady hand because she thought she was closing a door when she was actually confirming that the room behind it had already been stripped bare. She said, "What do you need from me?" Jitai looked at her. "I need you to be very careful," he said, "about what you're asking. I know what I'm asking. You are asking to be involved in what happens to Marcus. I'm asking what I can contribute to fixing my own situation," she said. "Those are not the same thing." He was quiet for a moment, in the way he was quiet when he was actually thinking and not just pausing. "There is a way," he said slowly, "to accelerate the recovery of the documentation, but it requires Marcus to believe he has a form of leverage he does not actually have." "What leverage?" "You," Jitai said. "He needs to believe that you are not under my protection, that you are unreachable and vulnerable, that contacting you directly would give him the ability to negotiate from a position of strength." The cold was in her lungs now, in her fingers. "You want me to call him," she said. "I want to give you the choice of calling him, with preparation, with full support in place, in a controlled environment where every word he says is recorded and every move he makes is tracked." He paused. "But it requires you to speak to him as though nothing has changed, as though you don't know what he's done, as though you are frightened and alone." She looked at him. "I am frightened," she said. "That part isn't a performance." "I know," he said quietly, "but I am not alone." Something shifted in his face, small, real. "No," he said. "You are not." She breathed out slowly. The condensation of it disappeared into the cold morning air. "Set it up," she said. She turned and walked back toward the house, and her footsteps on the stone path were steady, and her hands at her sides were not shaking, and in her chest the small rapid flickering that the ultrasound had found, the sound that was not hers alone anymore, continued its work with the patient insistence of something that had decided to exist and was not asking anyone's permission about it. And behind her in the gray garden, Kang Jitai stood and watched her go and said nothing, because there was nothing left to say that the morning hadn't already answered. They gave her a room to make the call from. Not the windowless room with the screens, a different one, smaller, with a single lamp on a side table and a chair positioned in the center of the floor like something deliberate, which it was. Jitai's technician, a quiet man named Seo, who wore his headphones around his neck like a permanent accessory, had spent 40 minutes setting up equipment that looked like it belonged in a facility larger and more official than a private estate north of Chicago. A recording device, a signal router that would make the call appear to originate from a cell tower near Amani's apartment on the south side, a trace protocol that would begin the moment Marcus answered and would track his location in real time against what they already knew. Seo explained all of this in English that was functional and without decoration. He showed her the device she would hold. He told her the call would be monitored in real time from the next room. He did not tell her not to be afraid, which she appreciated, because being told not to be afraid by someone in a controlled situation was one of the more useless experiences available to human beings. Jitai stood in the doorway while Seo finished. When Seo left, Jitai came in and crouched in front of her chair, the way he had crouched in the courthouse hallway, the way he had crouched in the warehouse. She was beginning to understand that it was the way he put himself at a person's level when he needed them to hear him clearly. "You don't have to do this," he said. "I know. If at any point you want to stop, Jitai." She looked at him. "I spent 4 years learning how to manage a conversation with Marcus Vaughn without him knowing what I was thinking. I am very good at this." He held her gaze. Then he stood. "Keep him talking for 3 minutes," he said. "Seo needs 3 minutes to confirm the location against the Detroit hotel. If he's moved, we need longer." "I'll keep him talking," she said. Jitai left. The door stayed open. She could hear faintly the sound of equipment from the next room. She looked at the phone in her hand. A prepaid device, untraceable. The number for Marcus's current line, obtained through means she hadn't asked about, was already entered. She had only to press call. She breathed in through her nose. 4 counts. The nausea that had been her companion for 7 weeks was present this morning, low and persistent, and she acknowledged it and set it to one side and breathed again. She pressed call. It rang 4 times. She counted them. On the 4th, the line connected. Silence. Then, hello. His voice. She had prepared for it. She had told herself she was prepared for it. The preparation had not accounted for the specific frequency of it, the way it existed in a part of her auditory memory that was entirely separate from conscious thought. Marcus's voice in the morning, Marcus's voice calling her name from another room, Marcus's voice saying, "I love you," with the particular inflection it had in the first year before the inflection changed, and she started being able to hear the difference even when she pretended she couldn't. "Marcus," she said. Her voice was steady. She was proud of it for being steady. A pause, longer than recognition required. "Imani." Something moved in his voice. Calculation, she thought, running through what her calling meant, what she knew, what she didn't. "Where are you calling from?" "Home," she said. "Where else would I be?" Another pause. "I've been trying to reach you," he said. "No, you haven't," she said, with exactly the tone of a woman who was exhausted and bitter and not dangerous. "You've been unreachable for 6 weeks, Marcus. Don't." I know, and There's things happening, Imani, things I can't explain over the phone." "Then explain them to me in person," she said. She let her voice break slightly. "Not much. Enough. I signed the papers. I went to the courthouse, and I signed the papers by myself because you couldn't even... And now I have men coming to my work, Marcus. To the cafe. I had customers in there." She heard him breathe. "What men?" he said, and the calculation was sharper now, more present. "Russian men," she said. "They said you owe them money. They said, Marcus, they took me somewhere. I don't know where. I got away, but I'm scared." She put the fear in her voice the way you put seasoning in something. Enough to taste, not enough to overwhelm. "I don't know what you did, but I need you to fix it. I need you to tell me what's happening." The silence on his end lasted 4 seconds. She counted. "You got away," he said. "I ran. There was a distraction, I don't know what, and I ran." She paused. "I'm at the apartment. I don't know if it's safe to be here." "Okay." His voice had shifted into something she recognized. The solving voice. The voice he used when a problem presented itself, and he was moving pieces in his head. She had once found that voice reassuring. "Okay, listen to me. Don't go to the police. Do you hear me? Do not go to the police. This is not something the police can..." "I know that," she said, and let the fear become anger for a moment, because that was true to who she was, and he would believe it. "I know that, Marcus. What do you think I am? I just need to know what I walked into. I need to know how bad this is." He stopped. She could almost hear him deciding how much to give her. "It's manageable, okay? It's a situation that is being managed." "By who?" "By me." She almost laughed. She did not laugh. "How?" she said. "I'm working something out with the people involved. A settlement. It's almost done." His voice had the particular smoothness of a man who had practiced saying this. "You just need to stay low for a few more days, and it'll be done, and none of this touches you." "None of this touches you." She pressed her thumbnail into her finger. "Marcus," she said, "there's something I need to tell you." A pause. "What?" he said. She let 3 seconds pass. Let him feel the weight of the incoming. "I'm pregnant," she said. The silence on his end was total and immediate. The silence of a man who had been hit somewhere he hadn't seen coming. She counted. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. "How far?" he said. 7 weeks, she said. "I found out after everything." I didn't know how to reach you, and Marcus, I've been dealing with this by myself while men with guns are asking where you are, and I'm. She let her voice fracture, genuinely this time, because the fracture was real even if the context was constructed. I need you to come back, or I need to come to you. I can't do this here by myself. The silence stretched. Come on, she thought. Come on, take it. Where are you right now? He said. Exactly. From the next room, very faint, she heard a sound, a small affirmative sound. A location confirmed. She let out a slow breath. I'm at the apartment, she said. I told you. Okay, Marcus said, and his voice had changed again into something she couldn't immediately read. Okay, I'm going to call you back. Give me an hour. Marcus, 1 hour, he said. Don't go anywhere. The line went dead. She sat in the chair with the phone in her lap and the lamp on the side table casting its single warm circle, and she breathed in and out and waited for the shaking to arrive. It didn't. She sat very still in the quiet room and let the steadiness remain, because it was the only thing she had built entirely herself, and she was keeping it. Jitai was in the doorway in under a minute. She looked up at him. Detroit, he said. Same hotel, room 417. He paused. He did not move. He believed you. He wanted to believe me, she said. There's a difference. Jitai looked at her for a moment with something in his expression that she had no name for yet. We move in 4 hours, he said. My men are already in Detroit. This ends tonight. She nodded. He turned to leave. Jitai, she said. He stopped. The woman, she said. Donna Reyes. What happens to her? He turned back. He looked at her steadily. She will answer for what she built, he said. The documents. My name. All of it, he said. Yes. She nodded once. He left. She sat in the room for another 10 minutes after that, alone, with the phone and the lamp and the sound of the estate operating around her in its efficient, purposeful way, and she thought about the fact that she had just done something she could not undo, had set something in motion that would end in a hotel room in Detroit in 4 hours, and Marcus would be there, and she would not. And what happened between those two facts was not something she would be shown in detail, and was something she had chosen not to ask about. She had chosen not to ask about it because she knew what the answer was, and because she had decided in the gray garden this morning that there was a difference between knowing what a man was and being responsible for what he brought on himself. Marcus had built a room with her name in the foundation and then set fire to the building. She had not built that room. She had not lit that fire. She had signed divorce papers in a courthouse and been 7 weeks pregnant and tried to go to work and been taken at gunpoint to a warehouse, and everything that followed from that was the consequence of choices made by people who had decided she was a usable thing. She was done being a usable thing. She stood up. She put the phone on the side table. She left the room. They moved at nightfall. She was not part of the convoy. Jitai had been clear about that, and she had not argued because arguing would have been irrational, and she was not irrational about this. She understood the difference between the phone call, which she could do in ways no one else in the estate could replicate, and the Detroit operation, which required people with a specific set of skills she did not possess. But she was awake. She sat in the kitchen office with its windows over the dark garden, and Mrs. Song brought her tea without being asked, and she drank it and watched the monitors that CO had left active on the wall. Not the exterior cameras, but a map interface with moving markers that she had learned over the last 4 days to read. 12 markers, moving southwest to northeast across the state in 2 vehicles. She watched them cross into Michigan in real time, and the watching was something to do with her body while her mind did what it was going to do regardless. She thought about Detroit. She thought about a hotel room, number 417, with Marcus in it. She thought about what he had looked like the first time she had ever seen him, at a fundraiser for a community organization she had volunteered with. Marcus, in a suit he wore with the slightly aggressive confidence of someone who had bought it specifically to be noticed. And she had noticed, and she had thought he was someone worth knowing. He had been someone worth knowing once. She believed that still, in the way you believed things that were true even after they had stopped being relevant. But he had made himself into something else. He had done it gradually, and with intention, And she had not seen all of it because she had not been looking in the right places. And that was the thing she had to live with. Not the guilt of it, because she hadn't done anything wrong, but the weight of it, which was different. Seo appeared at 11:40 with a tablet and set it on the table in front of her. "Mr. Kang says you can watch," he said. Not elaborating, not editorializing. She looked at the tablet, a live feed. Exterior of a building she didn't recognize. Tall, mid-range hotel, parking structure adjacent. The camera was high, probably a drone. She watched. The next 17 minutes were the longest of her life, and they were also, paradoxically, the quietest. Just the blue-gray drone feed and her breathing and the sound of the house settling into its late-night rhythms around her, and the markers on the map in her peripheral vision moving into position and then stopping. And then the lobby feed, Seo switched to it without her asking, showing the fast, controlled movement of men who knew exactly where they were going and had no interest in anything that was not the elevator to the 4th floor. She watched the elevator doors close. She breathed. She did not watch what happened in room 417. There was no feed for room 417, and she did not ask for one. She sat with her hands flat on the table and her tea cooling in its cup and the map with its stopped markers, and she waited. And the waiting had a different quality than all the other waiting she had done in the last 5 days. It was not the waiting of someone who had no agency. It was not the waiting of a woman in a chair in a warehouse with men deciding her fate around her. It was the waiting of someone who had done the part that was theirs to do and was now allowing other things to complete themselves. Seo's phone buzzed at 12:19. He looked at it. He said one word to someone. He looked at Amani. "Package secured," he said. "Mr. Kang will call." She nodded. The phone on the table rang 4 minutes later, Jitai's voice, steady as it always was, but with something different underneath it. Not satisfaction exactly, more the particular quality of a thing that has been set in motion finally reaching its end. "It's done," he said. "Marcus. In custody, unharmed, currently." A pause. "The declaration was signed. All accounts. Your name is removed from every document." She closed her eyes for 3 seconds. "Dana Reyes," she said. She was not in the room. She left the hotel at approximately 10 p.m. She is currently being located. "What does that mean?" "It means she has not escaped," he said. "It means we will find her." "Okay." Her voice was very quiet and very even. "Amani." He paused. "Are you all right?" She thought about the question. She gave it the consideration it deserved because he had asked it directly. And he had been direct with her since the garden, and that directness had value, and she was going to match it. "I don't know yet," she said honestly. "I think I will be." A pause. She heard his breathing. In 4 days she had learned the texture of his silences well enough to know this one was not empty. "I'll be back by morning," he said. "Sleep if you can." The line clicked. She sat in the kitchen office with the dark garden beyond the windows and the monitors and the cooling tea and the 12 markers on the map now moving south and west again, and she breathed, in and out, and the tiredness that was structural settled heavier in her bones, and she reached forward and wrapped both hands around the teacup for the warmth of it, and sat. She did not sleep. She stayed in that chair until she heard, at 6:14 in the morning, the sound of vehicles on the private road, the distinctive sequence of gate, gravel, engines cutting, and then footsteps in the house, and then the kitchen door opening. Jitai looked like a man who had been awake for 22 hours and had no intention of discussing it. His coat was on, and his face was the same face, and he sat down at the table across from her with the weight of someone setting down something heavy, and they looked at each other across the table in the early gray morning light. "It's done," he said again. The same words, but they meant something different the second time. "Here, in this kitchen, in this light. All of it," she said. "The documents are destroyed. The declaration is filed with an attorney who can produce it if needed. The Bratva were informed that the debt is cleared in full, and that any further action against you will be considered a direct action against the Kong family." He paused. "They accepted the terms." She absorbed that. "Marcus," she said. "What happens to Marcus?" Jitai looked at her directly. He will return the full amount, both portions. He has already arranged the transfer of what he has available. The remainder will be structured over time with enforcement. He paused. He will not come near you. He will not contact you. He will not have any further involvement with the child. Another pause. These are not requests. She looked at him. Did he know? She said. About the baby. Before tonight. He was told. And Jitai's jaw tightened by a fraction, the smallest movement. He asked if the child could be used as a negotiating point, he said. The kitchen was very quiet. He asked that, Amani said. Yes. She let that sit. She let it exist in the room with them, in the morning light, in its full and ugly shape. She didn't cover it or soften it or put it somewhere she didn't have to look at it. She looked at it completely until she understood its exact dimensions. Then she said, Okay. Jitai watched her. What does okay mean? He said. It means I'm done being surprised by who he is, she said. It means I already knew somewhere, and now I know for certain, and certain is easier than somewhere. She exhaled slowly. It means okay. The morning light was coming through the garden windows now, thin and pale and October honest, not pretty, but real. Outside, a bird was making a sound in the bare trees. The estate was waking up around them in its quiet, efficient way. Jitai reached across the table and set something down, a small folded piece of paper. She looked at it. What is this? She said. The declaration, he said. Your copy. Your name is not on anything that matters anymore. She picked it up. She unfolded it. She looked at the language, the specificity of it, her name explicitly and repeatedly removed, sole ownership declared, signatures and dates. She looked at it for a long time. Then she folded it again and set it down. Jitai, she said. He looked at her. What do you want? She said. From this. From... She made a small gesture that indicated the room and the house and the last 5 days and all of it. You paid money. You sent men to Detroit. You got a lawyer to produce a declaration at midnight. What does this cost me? He was quiet for a moment. Nothing, he said. That's not a real answer. It is the only accurate one I have, he said. And then, after a pause, you can leave. Today, if you want. I will arrange security for your apartment. The Bratva will not touch you. Marcus will not contact you. You can go back to your life. She looked at him. And the baby, she said. The child is yours, he said. Entirely. I have no claim on... I didn't ask about claims, she said. I asked what you want. The silence this time was the longest yet. Outside, the bird was still making its sound. The morning light moved slightly as a cloud passed. Jitai looked at his hands on the table, then he looked at her. I want you to be safe, he said. Both of you. I want... He stopped, tried again. I am not accustomed to wanting things that are not strategic. This is not strategic. She looked at him for a long time. And then, from somewhere in the house above them, from the direction of the room with the plants on the windowsill, came a sound. Small, barely audible, the signal of something needing attention, and she realized it was the call button Mrs. Song had shown her on the first night, and she realized someone had pressed it, and she realized with a sudden cold shock that the sound was coming from her room, and she had been down here all night, and the only people who knew where that button was were Mrs. Song and herself, and no one should have been in that room. Jitai was on his feet before she had fully processed it, one hand already at his side, his stillness gone completely, replaced with something fast and absolute, and he said one word to the man who appeared in the kitchen doorway, Hyun, always Hyun. And Hyun was already moving toward the stairs, and Jitai was right behind him, and Amani was on her feet and following because she was not going to sit in a kitchen while something happened above her head, and the three of them took the stairs fast, and the hallway was quiet, and the door to her room was ajar. Not open, not broken, ajar, by 2 inches with the lamp from inside casting a thin strip of amber light across the hallway floor. Jitai put his hand flat on Hyun's chest. Stop! Hyun stopped. Jitai moved to the door himself, and he moved the way he moved through everything, with the complete absence of wasted motion, every step placed with the deliberate quiet of a man who had been in situations like this enough times that his body had learned to go silent before his mind had finished deciding. He pushed the door open. The room was lit by the single lamp on the side table, the plants on the windowsill, the bed with its turned-down sheets, undisturbed, the chair by the window where Imani had sat the first night and watched the guards at the perimeter. In the chair sat a woman. She was in her early 30s, slim, with the sharp-cornered look of someone who stayed thin through tension rather than intention. Her hair was dark and pulled back, and she was wearing clothes that had been appropriate for something other than sitting in a stranger's room at 6 in the morning, and there was a cut above her left eyebrow that had bled and dried. Her hands were in her lap, visible, which was either compliance or the performance of it. She looked at Imani, not at Jitai, directly and without flinching. "You're the wife," the woman said. Imani looked at her. The recognition arrived slowly and then completely. "Dana Reyes," she said. The woman's chin moved. Confirmation without concession. Jitai had gone very still in the way that meant everything in him was active. Hyun was in the doorway behind Imani, and she could feel him calculating angles. "How did you get in?" Jitai said. His voice was at its quietest, which meant it was at its most dangerous. Dana looked at him then. She looked at him the way you looked at something you had been afraid of for a long time, and had decided, in a specific recent moment, to stop being afraid of. "Service entrance," she said. "The camera on the east side has a 12-second lag. The tree line covers the approach from the road. You should fix that." Jitai said nothing. Imani heard Hyun behind her take one step forward, and Jitai raised 2 fingers without looking back, and Hyun stopped. "You left the hotel at 10, Imani said. "That was 8 hours ago." "I drove," Dana said. "I had to think." "About what?" Dana looked at her again, and the look was complicated in a way that Imani was too tired and too wired to fully read, containing things that had been assembled over many hours in a car on a dark highway, and were not yet organized enough to be easily given. "About what I built," Dana said, "and who I built it for." Imani moved to the foot of the bed and sat on its edge, because her legs had been standing for long enough, and the morning was going to require whatever steadiness she had left, and she was going to conserve it deliberately. She looked at Dana Reyes across the small room in the lamplight and waited. Dana breathed in. Her hands in her lap turned over once, palms up, then back down. "I did the accounts," she said. "I know you know that. I set up the structures. I ran the transactions. I made your name appear in the documentation." She paused. "I want you to know I understood what I was doing." "That's not an apology," Imani said. "No," Dana said. "It's not. I don't think an apology covers it, and I'm not going to insult you with one." "Then what is it?" "It's a confession," Dana said. "I'm giving it to you because I owe you that, not because I expect it to change anything." She stopped. Her jaw tightened and then released. "Marcus told me you were separated, that the marriage was over and everything but paperwork, that you knew about the business and had chosen not to ask questions because you benefited from the income." She paused. "I believed him." The room was quiet. "You believed him," Imani said. "For about 8 months, yes. And after 8 months," Dana looked at her hands, "I found your name on the accounts and I understood what they were for, and I asked him directly if you knew. He said yes." She paused. "He said you'd agreed to be listed as a silent partner to protect the family income. He showed me a text conversation that looked like the two of you had discussed it." "He fabricated a text conversation." "Yes. I found the original, the real one, in the company archive. The texts he showed me had been edited. The original conversation was about your lease renewal." She paused. "I found this 4 months ago." Imani looked at her for a long time. "And you kept going," she said. Dana didn't look away. "I had moved $400,000 through those accounts by then. My name was on the internal records. If the structure came apart, I was as exposed as he was." She breathed. "I was afraid. So you made sure my name was the one on the external documents? Yes. To protect yourself? Yes. The words sat in the room like something with mass. Jitai was standing near the window, and he had not moved or spoken, and Amani understood that he was allowing her to conduct this, which was the right call and which she was grateful for without looking at him. What do you want? Amani said. Right now. You drove 8 hours to get here. What are you here for? Dana reached into the inside pocket of her jacket. Jitai moved. She went very still and said, It's a drive. Just a drive. She extracted a small flash drive, held it between two fingers where everyone could see it clearly, and set it on the side table next to the lamp. Everything, she said. Every transaction, every internal document, the full communication record between Marcus and the Bratva, the original texts before they were edited, time-stamped access logs showing that the external account documents were created from his work terminal, not mine, not yours. She looked at Amani. It clears you completely, and it's more comprehensive than whatever you already have. Amani looked at the drive. Why? She said. Because I built a thing that was used to destroy someone who hadn't done anything, Dana said. And I knew that for 4 months, and I kept doing it anyway, because I was scared, and I have to live in my own skin, and I cannot live in it with this in it. The morning light was fully in the room now, coming through the window behind Dana, cold and flat and October clear. It showed the exhaustion in Dana's face, the specific exhaustion of someone who had not slept, not because they were busy, but because they had been sitting in the dark with something heavy and couldn't put it down to rest. Amani recognized that exhaustion. She had worn it herself for weeks. She reached out and picked up the drive. She turned it over in her fingers. Small, ordinary. The weight of it had nothing to do with its size. You're going to have to answer for what you did, Amani said. Not to Jitai. To Dana directly. Not to me. But the organizations involved, the money that moved through those accounts didn't only belong to Marcus. Dana nodded. I know. That's not a small thing. I know that too. Amani looked at her for a moment longer. Then she looked at Jitai. He was watching her. He had been watching her through all of it with the focused attention he gave things that mattered to him, and she held his gaze, and a conversation happened in the silence that used none of the words available to either of them. She cooperates fully, Amani said. Everything she has, and she's not. She stopped, chose the next word carefully. The accounting is financial. She answers for the financial piece. Jitai looked at her for 2 seconds. Agreed, he said. Dana closed her eyes briefly, with the specific quality of someone who had prepared for a much worse version of this and was experiencing the lesser version as something close to physical relief. There's one more thing, Dana said. Amani waited. Marcus's child, she said, and her voice changed slightly on the word, became quieter, less structured. I didn't know about the pregnancy when I chose your name for the documents. I want you to know that. It doesn't change what I did. But I want you to know I didn't know. Amani looked at her. She thought about whether it mattered. She decided it mattered a small but real amount, not enough to change anything, but enough to be true. Okay, she said. She stood up from the bed. She looked at Jitai. She handed him the drive. I'm going to sleep, she said. For real this time. She left the room. In the hallway, she stopped and leaned her back against the wall and let her eyes close for a moment, just a moment. In the quiet of the corridor, with the morning light coming through the window at the far end, and the sound of Jitai's voice, low and even, coming through the door as he began the conversation that was his to conduct. She breathed in and out 3 times, completely. Then she pushed off the wall and walked down the hallway to the room Mrs. Song had given her on the first night. Not the room she had been avoiding going back to, but a different one, because the estate was large and Mrs. Song had quietly relocated her 2 days ago without explanation, which Amani had understood to be a form of practical kindness. And she lay down on the bed without removing her shoes, and she was asleep in under 4 minutes. She slept for 9 hours. When she woke, the light was afternoon, pale gold through thin curtains, and the house was quiet in a different way than it had been. Not the quiet of held breath, but the quiet of something that had finished. She found Mrs. Song in the hallway. "The woman?" Imani said. "Gone," Mrs. Song said. "This morning, Mr. Kang's men. She went with them without difficulty." Imani nodded. "Mr. Kang?" she said. "Downstairs," Mrs. Song said. "He has been there for several hours." She was in the kitchen office. Of course he was. He was at the long table with his coffee and his papers, and the window behind him showing the October garden in its afternoon light, which was better than the morning light, warmer, less honest, more forgiving. He looked up when she came in. She sat across from him. She did not take the chair she usually took. She took the one closer, leaving less of the table between them. He looked at her for a moment. Then he got up and poured her coffee without asking, which was the first time he had done that, always before leaving her to pour her own, and he set it in front of her and sat back down. She wrapped her hands around the cup. "Donna Reyes," she said, "being processed through a channel that will allow her to provide full cooperation in exchange for managed exposure," he said. "It will take time, but the financial documentation she provided is comprehensive. Your name will be clear in every record that matters." "What happens to her at the end of the process?" "She will lose everything she made," he said, "and she will be watched for a long time, but she will be able to live her life." Imani nodded. "Marcus," she said, "the transfers completed this morning. Both debts satisfied. The declaration of sole ownership is filed." He paused. "He is in Detroit. He will stay in Detroit or wherever he chooses to go that is not here, for reasons he understands completely. He won't fight for the child." "No," Jitai said, and his voice was flat in a way that told her the conversation in room 417 had covered this territory in terms that left no ambiguity. She drank her coffee. The afternoon light moved slightly as a cloud passed and came back. "I want to call my sister," she said. "Yes," he said. "Use your own phone. It's safe." She nodded. She didn't move yet. She sat with the coffee and the afternoon and the quiet that had a different quality now. The quality of something cleared rather than something suppressed. And she thought about what she was going to tell Janelle, who taught 4th grade in Oak Park, and who had called her 17 times in the last 6 days, and who was going to have a great deal to say when she finally got through. And the thought of Janelle's voice, uncontrolled and immediate and entirely hers, made something loosen in Imani's chest that had been tight since the courthouse. "I'm going to have to figure out where I live," she said. Not to Jitai specifically, to the problem, out loud, because that was how she worked through things. "My apartment isn't safe long term. My job, the cafe, I don't know if I can go back there." "You don't have to decide today," Jitai said. "I know, but I have to decide eventually. I have to build something." She looked at her coffee. "I have about 6 months before the logistics of building something become significantly more complicated." She said it without self-pity and without humor. She said it as a fact, which it was. Jitai was quiet for a moment. "There is an apartment," he said slowly, "on the property, separate from the main house. It was built for... It has been unused for some time. It has its own entrance, its own space. It is not the main house." He paused. "You would not be a guest. You would not be a dependent. It would be yours to use as you chose for as long as you chose." She looked at him. "That is a very careful sentence," she said. "Yes." "You've been thinking about how to say it." "For several hours," he admitted. She looked at the garden through the window. The dead tree at the far end had its bare branches against the afternoon sky, and she noticed, for the first time, that there was a small growth on the lowest branch. Not a leaf, too late in the year for leaves, but a bud casing, tight and brown and stubbornly present, the kind of thing that happened when a tree wasn't as dead as it looked. "If I stayed," she said, "it would not be because I owe you anything." "Correct," he said, "and it would not be because I'm afraid to leave." "Correct, and it would not be permanent until it was a choice." She looked at him. "An actual choice, made when I have enough ground under me to make it." "Correct," he said again, for the 3rd time, with the particular patience of a man who had decided to let something take the time it needed. She breathed in, out. The afternoon light was very still. Show me the apartment, she said. He stood. He took his coffee. She took hers, and they walked out through the garden door into the October afternoon, which was cold and clear and smelled of the season changing, and the lake in the distance, and the particular Chicago smell of stone and wind that she had lived inside her entire life, and that meant, in the most basic and inarguable way, home. The apartment was at the north end of the property, connected to the main building by a covered walkway, but with its own door, its own key, its own windows facing east over a section of garden that was smaller and less formal than the main grounds. It had been built well and maintained in the quiet way things were maintained when someone cared about them without using them. 2 rooms, a kitchen that was real, not decorative, a bathroom with a window, morning light in every room, from the eastern exposure, which was the best light. She stood in the middle of the main room and looked at it. It was not her apartment on the south side. It was not the apartment she had shared with Marcus, or the one before that, or her mother's house in the neighborhood where she had grown up and learned to walk watching the floor in case the ground disappeared. It was not any place she had been before, which meant it was not carrying the shape of anything she had already survived. That was not nothing. She turned around. Jitai was standing in the doorway, not coming in, the specific deliberateness of a man remaining outside the threshold because he understood that the threshold was hers to decide about. It needs things, she said. Yes. A real lamp, that one, she gestured at the ceiling fixture, is too cold. All right. And something on the windowsill. She looked at the east window. Something that grows. I'll tell Mrs. Song, he said. She looked at him in the doorway, in the afternoon light, with the cold coming in around him from the garden, and she thought about courthouses and warehouses and Detroit hotel rooms and unsigned texts and forged signatures and one plain white card, and she thought about a small gray screen in a medical bag and a sound that was rapid and insistent and entirely without doubt about its own right to exist, and she thought about the word safe, which she had been thinking about since the car ride on the first night. What it meant, who got to define it, what it cost. She walked across the room and stood in front of him in the doorway. You should sleep, she said. You've been awake for what, 24 hours? More? It doesn't matter. It does, she said. You need to be functional. I need you to be functional. She paused. We're going to have a conversation at some point when we're both rested about what this is, what we're doing, what the rules are. She paused again. But not today. He looked at her. Something in his face that was neither controlled nor performed moved through it and then settled, like water finding its level. Not today, he agreed. She stepped past him into the covered walkway, and they walked back toward the main house in the afternoon cold, not speaking, the distance between them different than it had been. Not smaller, exactly, but more accurately measured, which was better than smaller. Janelle picked up on the second ring. Amani. Her voice was everything. Anger and relief and the specific pitch of a person who had been afraid for days and was transferring that fear directly into volume. Do you have any idea? I have called you 17 times. 17. I called the cafe and Darnell told me you just didn't show up, and your apartment phone rings and rings, and I was about to call. I was this close to calling. I know, Amani said. I'm sorry. Sorry. She's sorry. Janelle said this to no one. Where are you? Are you okay? What happened with the papers? Did you sign? Is it done? It's done, Amani said. The papers are signed. It's over. And Marcus? Gone, Amani said. He's not coming back. A pause. Janelle heard something in those words because Janelle always heard things, had been hearing things in Amani's words since they were children on the same block taking turns keeping watch for each other. Amani, she said quieter now. What happened? A lot, Amani said. I'll tell you all of it. I will, but not on the phone. She looked at the garden through the kitchen window. Can you come up this weekend? I'm somewhere north of the city. I'll send you the address. North of the city where? It's... Janelle? I'll explain everything. I promise. Just come. A beat. Are you safe? Janelle said. The question stripped of everything else, just those 3 words. Amani looked at the garden, the bare tree, the small bud casing on the lowest branch, tight and brown and stubbornly, quietly present. "Yeah," she said. "I think I really am." She heard Janelle exhale, a full-body exhale, the kind that released something that had been held at considerable cost. "Saturday," Janelle said. "I'll be there Saturday. You better have coffee." "I'll have coffee," Amani said. After she hung up, she sat for a long time in the kitchen, with the afternoon moving toward evening around her, the light changing the way it changed in October. Quickly, without ceremony, one moment gold and the next simply gone. She sat with her hands in her lap and the quiet of the house, and the particular feeling of a day that had been longer than its hours, and had changed more than its events, and she pressed her thumbnail into her index finger, once, out of habit. And then she looked at it, the small white crescent, and she uncurled her hand and laid it flat on the table, palm up, open. Old habits could be set down. Some of them. Not all at once, and not without the effort of noticing them first. But they could be set down. 6 months later, in the smallest hours of a spring morning that smelled of rain in the lake and something warmer than October had permitted, Ari Brooks Kang came into the world in a room at Northwestern Memorial that had a window facing east, which Amani had specifically requested. And the light was just beginning when it happened. Not daylight yet, but the intimation of it, the sky going from black to the particular dark blue that meant the dark had spent itself and was giving way to something else. She weighed 7 pounds and 2 ounces. She had her mother's eyes and her mother's mouth and her mother's absolute refusal to do anything quietly, which she announced from the first second with a completeness that startled every adult in the room, except Amani, who had known, for 6 months, that this child had decided to exist with a thoroughness that didn't require anyone's permission. Janelle was in the waiting room and came in immediately and sat on the edge of the bed and held her sister's hand and didn't say anything for a full 2 minutes, which was unprecedented in the history of Janelle Patterson and was more eloquent than anything she could have said. Jite came in last. He had been in the hospital since 4 in the morning, in the corridor, present in the way he was present for things he cared about, without announcement, without requiring acknowledgement, simply there and available. When the nurse brought him into the room, he stopped in the doorway, the same way he had stood in the doorway of the apartment on the property, remaining outside the threshold until it was offered. Amani looked at him from the bed, exhausted in every layer of herself, hollowed out and somehow more solid than she had ever been, and she nodded at the chair beside her. He came in. He sat down. The nurse placed Ari in Amani's arms, and Amani looked at her daughter. This small, vehement, entirely new person who had arrived in the world through the specific chaos of the last 6 months and was somehow, against all reasonable odds, here and whole and furious with health. And she held her for a long moment before she turned and held her out to Jitai. He looked at the child in Imani's arms. Something moved in his face that had no name that either of them had tried to put to it yet, something that existed below the level where he controlled things. He took her. He held her with the careful, deliberate attention he gave everything that mattered to him, completely, without reservation, as though she were the most important thing in the room, which she was. Janelle made a sound from the edge of the bed that she tried to convert into a cleared throat, and failed. Ari, for her part, was briefly quiet in Jitai's arms. 1 second, 2, in the way that newborns were sometimes briefly quiet when they encountered something that surprised them into stillness. Then she resumed her work. "She's loud," Jitai said. "Yes," Amani said. "Good," he said, and his voice was very quiet, and his eyes did not leave Ari's face. 3 months after that, on a Saturday morning when the city had finally decided to be summer, Jitai and Imani stood in a room with a judge and Janelle and Mrs. Song and Jitai's mother. A small woman with an exact posture and eyes that had assessed Imani thoroughly over dinner the previous winter and then informed her son, in Korean, that Mrs. Song quietly translated that she had made worse decisions than this one and to stop waiting. And Jitai signed the legal documentation acknowledging Ari Brooks Kang as his daughter in every way the law allowed. It was not a performance. It was not strategic. It was the single most unambiguous act Amani had ever watched anyone perform, made more unambiguous by the fact that the man performing it was one who rarely did anything without reason, and this was done for no reason that served him, only for the reason that the child deserved a father who had chosen her rather than one who had tried to use her as a bargaining point in a hotel room in Detroit. Afterward, outside on the courthouse steps, a different courthouse, a different morning, September light, and the city going about its Saturday around them. Amani stood with Ari against her shoulder and felt the weight of her, the solid and astonishing weight of a 3-month-old person who was busy absorbing the world with an intensity that seemed disproportionate to her size, and Jitai stood beside her, close but not touching, the way he still did sometimes, offering proximity without assumption, which was a habit he had built early and had not lost. "You know," Janelle said, appearing at Amani's elbow with the coffee she had located somewhere nearby in the inexplicable way Janelle always located coffee, "the two of you standing 6 inches apart like you're not... You know that everybody knows, right?" "Janelle," Amani said, "I'm just saying." Jitai looked at Janelle with the expression he wore when he was deciding whether a thing Janelle had said was a challenge or an observation. He had been making this evaluation for 8 months and had not yet fully resolved it, which Janelle appeared to find satisfying. Amani shifted Ari on her shoulder. The baby grabbed a fistful of Amani's collar and held on with the unreasonable strength of the very young and the determined. "Give her the coffee, Janelle," Amani said. "Who, you or him?" "Me," she said. "Obviously me." Janelle handed it over, satisfied. The September morning spread out around them. The courthouse steps, the street below, the city in every direction, enormous and indifferent and blazing with the particular light of early fall, which was not the cold gray light of the October morning when a woman with divorce papers had walked into a man in a courthouse hallway and both their lives had been permanently altered by the collision. That had been almost a year ago. A year was not long. It was not enough time to understand everything, to have resolved every complicated thing that lived in the space between two people who had come to each other through damage and necessity and had stayed through something else, something neither of them had a clean word for yet. But a year was long enough to know the shape of someone's silences, long enough to know that a man who stood in doorways waiting to be invited in would, once invited, not leave. Long enough to know that a child who had arrived in chaos could, in the right hands, grow in the way things grew when they were tended without condition. Ari turned her face toward the morning light. She did this often, turned toward brightness, without hesitation, as though it were simply obvious where to look. Amani watched her do it and felt Jitai's hand settle at the small of her back, quiet and without weight, there and not demanding anything. She didn't move away from it. The city went on around them. The light was very good.